Hi everybody, and welcome to another piano tutorial. I've been playing a lot of Nier and Nier Automata stuff lately, and I've gotten a couple of requests for tutorials for stuff that I've played. Last year, I already created a tutorial for Copied City because that has been like my most watched video ever, so I figured there's going to be people interested in learning that. And I've also gotten requests for a couple other things, and this is fulfilling one of those. This is for Kaine, which I figure is probably most likely to be the highest demanded tutorial for Nier, the original game. And actually, this track appears in both games, really. But it's a really iconic track, and it's really lovely. So let's get to learning it. Okay, so starting off, we have one of the most iconic parts of the track to start with. Really simple to learn, really. So our right hand is going to be doing one thing over and over again. So one thing that I do with this that you'll notice is I start with my thumb hitting C, but then when we get here, I know I'm going to have to go down to B flat, so I kind of change things up. I hit that with my middle finger instead of my pointer, so that I can use my pointer for C and my thumb for B flat. Now, there's a couple of ways you can do this. That's the way I do it. If you wanted to, you could just cross over all the time. I feel like that's less comfortable. It requires much more movement, much more pivoting of your hand. So, but it's up to you. Both of those are viable ways to do it. Now, that's just going to repeat a bunch of times for the first 16 measures. Meanwhile, the left hand, also very simple, is just going to be doing two things. First, it's going to be doing this. That 4 times. And then almost the same thing, but we stretch a little bit. And of course, like, you'll be using sustain pedal for this most likely, so you don't have to stretch as much as I'm stretching here to show it. But yeah, so four starting on G as the bass, and then 4 with E flat as the bass, and then that repeats 4, 4, 4, 4. So yeah, let's put it all together and show off what it looks like. So before we dive straight into the next section, it's worth pointing out that there is a jump between where we ended off in the previous section, which was something like here, and the next section, which starts with that. And notice my hand position on the right hand. I am intentionally having my pinky on G because then we're going to do that again. The good news is the previous section slows down rather dramatically at the end of it, so you have some time to get from point A to point B, and with practice, you'll eventually get used to it. It'll become a little bit more second nature, and you won't have to think of it quite as actively. So now with that done, let's actually talk about what's in this section. Okay, so first off, the right hand in this section starts out really similar to in the previous section. It's just an octave lower. Now once we get halfway through, they throw in something new. Now, I think this is meant to simulate the ting that happens in the original song at that point. But we've got C, D, and B flat going on here. Now, if you think back to the first section, I mentioned there's two ways that you have at least two options of how to finger this stuff, and the other option that I don't normally do is the crossover option. That might actually be easier for this, because if you'll notice, your thumb's already on C, your index finger's already going to basically be on its way back to D, and then you just throw that note in, and you've got it. So if you find that easier, then go ahead and do it. I eventually got used to doing it the other way anyway. But anyway, that's how the second half of the right hand of the section begins. Then we go back into that pattern again, and just the end changes up a little bit. So what I did there is I stretched my index finger down so that I can get down here easier. I guess there's probably multiple ways you could do that. That's just how I do it. And that last chord is pretty soft here. There's going to be another iteration of this later in the song where that's going to be louder, but that's kind of a distinguishing feature in this section. So with that said, let's go look at the left hand. Okay, the left hand is pretty simple to learn here. It's just chords for the most part. So we start with a G minor seventh. Everything's going to be sevenths. And there you go, that's the whole thing. So, this will make more sense in terms of how long each chord is held when we put them both together, which we'll do right now. So before we get into this next section, which is, I guess you could consider it the first verse, one thing I haven't mentioned yet is the tempo in this song is largely variable. The first section is one speed, then the second part that we went through is faster than that, and then this part's going to be a little slower again. You're probably best off listening to the original if you want a better sense of the ups and downs in context. But let's go through the chords in this right hand of this section, and I'll point a couple things out as we go along. So that was the first half. A couple things I want to point out. So I'm purposely using my thumb and index here so that I have room to get up there. And then I use my ring finger for this. You could probably do this a couple of ways, but given that I'm coming from here with my pinky, that makes the most sense to me. Then this is sort of an arpeggio here. It's not all at once. It's like that. Now here, this is a bit of a stretch. If this is uncomfortable, you can figure out your own thing. But again, I'm intentionally using my middle finger here because I have two more notes to do up there, and this prevents me having to do any crazy crossing over or anything. Then we have to get down here. There's a lot of notes in this chord, which when we put it together later you'll see. And then, again, jumping up here with my thumb and index because we're going to immediately have to get there again. So that part's the same as the first half of this section, and then... So one other thing to point out, I'm using my middle finger there so that I'm right in position for that. So that's your right hand. Let's take a look at the left. I'm mostly just going to walk through the left hand as is, because there's not too much to say about it. It's very much one note at a time for the most part, and just keep an eye on the fingering that's going on. The one thing maybe worth calling out is right at the end there. There's a little bit of a jump there. Speaking of jumps, I should probably call out what's coming next, because we're going to be jumping down to here after that. You've got time, though, because it's going to be timed sort of like that. And actually, I probably played that faster than the actual thing. I'll try to slow this to somewhere near the correct tempo for putting it all together. Let's look at that now. Okay, so next is the first chorus, so to speak, and this section's quite meaty, so I'm going to do it half by half. So we're gonna focus on 8 measures first, and we're gonna start with the right hand. So here we go. First of all, this chord, what we're starting with. That's quite a handful right there. Remember that because you're going to be coming back to this chord a few times. You're also going to be coming to like parts of this chord, like that, or even that. So this chord is very central to the stuff that will be going on. So. Now what I'm doing here, you'll notice, is I'm using my thumb to hit both of these notes. In this particular case, you don't necessarily have to do it, but I still like doing it, just because, I don't know, I got used to doing this in a couple of different places, so I threw it in pretty much wherever I could. So now you see we're doing this without the G. And now here you really want to do the 2 notes with one thumb thing. And here you'll notice this pinky never lifts. So let me go through that last part again. Let me accentuate why we do this way. Because if we do that this way, you have to jump and do something like that. So I find it a lot more natural to not have to jump here and just do. So like my pinky is hitting this. My pinky is free when I do this way. When I do it this way, I mean, trying to do that without a pinky would be really uncomfortable, and it wouldn't really get you all the way here anyway, so. Now this is kind of a jump. You're going to have to get used to that one. You're probably going to need to peek at your right hand when you're playing this all together to get there. Now, the good thing is, you're naturally going to hit this with your pinky up here anyway, so it's not too much of a stretch of the imagination. It's a little more of a stretch of your hand than it is of your imagination to get down there. And both of those have, like, the B is a common note in both of those, but first, in the first chord here, your thumb and index are involved, and then here your thumb, index, and middle finger are going to be involved. So that's your right hand. Let me just review that once, just to make sure it's all clear. Okay, now for the left hand. Again, this is another section where the left hand is really ambling around one note at a time, but there are some jumps and crossovers involved, so actually it starts with one of the more challenging ones, really, because we immediately have this octave, followed by a crossover to your ring finger, because you want to be able to get to these notes comfortably, and middle finger ain't gonna cut it for that. So that's your first phrase in the left hand. So of note here, the B is common. Now here, I'm crossing over or jumping over to the thumb here. You can kind of cross, you can't, I don't know how well you can see it, but you can kind of like, my thumb is already moving this way. Obviously I wouldn't do this with my hand, that would be painful, but... So that's actually not too bad, but it's a bit of a jump. So again with a common note here, this A, and then the last two are the same notes an octave apart. Out of context, that might seem a little like weirdly redundant, but remember that what's going on in the right hand at this point is those two chords with the common note that the pinky is staying on. So you've got a suspended chord going on here, and then a major chord, a major E chord going on there. So that's your resolution to the first half. So let me just play that all in sequence to review it real quick, and then we'll play the whole thing together. So, as I'm going to play these together, I will point out that the very end of this half of the chorus is going to be the most overall demanding because you've got jumps happening kind of in both hands. But the right-hand jump is a little bit ahead of the left-hand jump, but it's a very active part of the song right there. So it's definitely going to take some practice, so like don't get discouraged if you have problems with that part in particular. Or really anything that involves jumps, obviously, it's just a matter of time to start getting your hands used to where they need to go, and your brain used to where your hands need to go, so that you don't need to think quite as hard about it anymore. But yeah, let's take a look. Okay, second half of the first chorus. Again, we're going to look at the right hand first. And again, it's going to start out with that chord. Now, one thing that I should point out, the first time we did this, in the first half, we had that note there. That note's not going to be there in either occurrence of this phrase in the second half of this chorus. And now, instead of in the first half we had that, no more thumb shenanigans. We've got a straight up E chord. Now I did a really weird thing there. You've got a couple of options here. I prefer doing a really early crossover so I'm going from ring to thumb to middle so that I can do this without having to jump. The alternative is you jump, because you would have to do something like that. I found that to be error prone. I didn't like how it felt, so I did the early crossover instead. I guess I slightly don't like how that feels either, but I dislike it less, so I went with it. Again, halfway through this half, so the last quarter, I guess, like with the first part, is these four notes without the G. Again, no D here. Now here, we do have the D here. We're on our middle finger here. I'm immediately going to switch to my index. So there's a bunch of chords there, and your left hand is also going to be doing stuff. This is going to take some time to learn. Just give yourself time to get used to it. So what did we have? And there's your ending out of the first chorus. So let's look at the right hand in review, just all together without any pauses. As for the left hand in the second half of this chorus, the good news is we start up here, so we don't have any big jump this time. And there it is again. That is the same thing the first and second time that were based in C, followed by that, which is a little bit different, because the first time we had that, which went from, we had our pinky on A to go up to D. The second time, we again sneak our thumb under to jump down and do thumb on A down to pinky on D. And then we switch up into E flat. Now, keep in mind here, we've got, that's just an octave. This has got the third in it. That may sound very bland to you out of context right now. We've just got 4 straight up 1-5-8 progressions here, but this is the part where the right hand is doing 4 chords in a row, so it's actually sort of a reprieve in a way, because you're going to be concentrating on where the heck your right hand is going right now. So it's nice that you can do this without really thinking much. And there's your outro. So that remains constant in the first and third measure. The second measure is the low G, and then the fourth is the high G. One thing to point out that wasn't necessarily obvious before when I did the right hand is the second time that you're doing that, you're actually leading the right hand. The right hand starts when you hit that. Wasn't necessarily noticeable out of context, but it's like that. We'll see that again when I play both hands fully in context of each other, but first let me just play through the left hand nonstop. Alright, so it's review time, but rather than just do the second half altogether, I'm going to do the whole chorus altogether so you get more context around it. Here we go. Okay, so now that we're done with the first chorus, we go back into part of the intro again, but this time it's only 8 measures, not 16. And the only difference is going to be that we end it with a little bit more force than we did at the beginning. So this is what it looks like. And that's that entire bit, and then we go into the second verse, which we'll talk about in a moment. One other thing to point out is you've got all the time in the world to get your hands to where they need to be to start this, because you're coming out of a single note in the left hand, a single chord in the right hand, and the chorus kind of like slows to a halt sort of at the end, so you've got plenty of time to think and get where you need to be for that. But yeah, with that said, let's go into the second verse. So let's walk through the right hand of the second verse. Now, one thing to immediately point out about the second verse, it's very much more like accompaniment style or ad lib. It's not strictly following the vocal line the way that the first verse was. So, very much more in the way of just like chords, and it's not going to resemble the first verse at all, especially in the right hand. Same chord progression though. So we start down here. Notice I'm crossing over here. This is very important because you're going to end up back here. So that makes it feel a lot more natural. There's a couple of ways you can do this. This is the way that I do it, which is this. We're basically like, I'm retracing my steps here and then crossing over. The reason I'm crossing over is because we're doing that. But you could ostensibly do something else like... you could do something like that, where you refinger this to your pinky when you come down here. One thing worth pointing out there, this starts out with your thumb on A, but then we bounce our thumb up here. So it's essentially an F major chord, but we start without the C, and then it comes in. So that's what your right hand looks like. I will play that again nonstop right now before we move on to the left. Okay, as for the left hand of the second verse, again, this is very ambling, one note at a time sort of deal. It starts with a... We're starting in G, but there's going to be an A thrown in, just like there was with the right hand. So the right hand was doing that. You've got the A up there. Well, you've also got the A down there. So the first two measures in the left hand are like that. Notice I'm hitting this with my ring finger. If you have the wherewithal to do that, then do it, because that gives you room to go down here with your pinky, so... Notice there was a bit of a gap in what I played in that measure with the left hand. That's because this is one of those things that makes a lot more sense in context with the right hand, because what's going on is... So what we had is... When that hits in the right hand, there's nothing played in the left, so... Pause. Like that. And then we do... Pause. Pause. So there's a one-note pause, a one-step pause, I guess you could say, in each of those measures at different times. So just kind of get used to where those are. It's probably going to be easier to remember in context with the right hand, and we'll be playing that next, so you'll get a better idea of what's going on there. One quick note, that very last measure has the same exact thing going on as the earlier E-flat measure, where you've got pause. So that was your last measure. So yeah, I'm going to play those in context of each other, left hand, right hand at the same time. First I'll do just the left hand alone, but then we'll do both, so hopefully you'll get a better understanding of what's going on there. Okay, let's take a look at both hands together for the second verse. Okay, going into the second chorus, again we're going to start with the right hand. Again, it's going to start with this chord. There's going to be some surprises in the left hand, but the right hand, for the first half of the chorus, for the first four measures of it, something to keep in mind, and this is actually something that I didn't quite 100% pick up on when I first played this on the channel, is... In the first four measures, every chance you have to hit that note, you're basically going to be hitting that note. You'll see what I mean in a minute. So, there it is. There it is again. There it is again. And there it is again. It's all over the place. So we're doing that thing where we hit both notes with the thumb again. Again, you don't necessarily have to. It's only 3 notes, but it puts me in better position to get up here right away. Again, I'm doing that early switch. That's the way I prefer to do this. You can figure out your own way if that's uncomfortable. Then we go to just a straight up... I would call this a C major chord, but the bass is actually A. So it's actually an A7. Now we're not hitting that note. Now we're doing this chord again, but notice that the first time I was just playing it straight up this way. You could do it that way if you want, but I do it this way so that I can move my my other fingers are free, so I can get them situated to do that. But then here, this is important to hit this G with the middle finger, because you need these fingers free so that you can hit this with your pinky, and then that including your ring finger. And then we're going to be jumping down to here again and carrying the pinky through to both chords again. So that last measure there is also the same as in the previous chorus that we did. So let me just play that all through in sequence without interruptions, and then we'll move on to the left hand, which, like I said, will be a little interesting. There's a surprise in store. Okay, so the left hand of the second chorus. I mentioned there's going to be a surprise. Well, here it is. Yeah, what's that? We're starting on E. This is not where the chorus normally starts. The chorus normally starts in the key of C. Because it's, remember that? Yeah, and then it worked its way up to E. Nope, this time we're going the other way. So they threw in a curveball this time, which I think is actually really interesting and really cool. But anyway, so what are we doing in the left hand? Now, this is another thing where if you have the wherewithal, this will make your life easier. Tucking our thumb under, and then use your ring finger, not your pinky, for this, because it goes down there. If you use your pinky, it's not the end of the world. You just feel really goofy about it because you're going to be jumping. But that's doable too. So, another thing to point out about this. Notice how we're kind of like staying on... We're always bouncing back to this B here. Then this is just straight up and down. And then here... we're bouncing back to the G, so that motif kind of comes and goes every other measure. And now 2 measures here, we're just going to be straight up and down. And then to end. One thing to notice there, in direct contrast to the first chorus, which did that, and the A was always there. This is different. This time we're throwing in the C up here, and then the B is going B to B. So. And the E, we don't have any of that business where the E was at the higher octave and the lower octave. No, this is just down here the entire time. So some differences to keep in mind from the first chorus to the second. Now with that said, I'm going to play that once without interruption, and then we'll look at both hands together for that first half of the second chorus, and then we'll move on. Okay, so let's throw both hands together for the first half of the second chorus. One thing I have neglected to mention in this part of the song is, again, bringing up the dynamics of speed in this song. This is the fastest part of the song, probably. So the second verse kind of slows down at the last couple of measures, and then this comes in and very quickly hits a faster speed, and then it will also slow down towards the end, and the part after this will be slower. More on that later, but let me play both hands together of this. Alright, the second half of the second chorus is kind of the most intense part of the entire song. This part gets quite a bit louder than the rest. The right hand is still pretty similar to other parts of both choruses. In fact, if anything, it's actually a little bit lighter on the right hand because there's going to be a lot going on in the left hand. We'll get to that in a bit. But here's what the right hand goes like. Notice that here I'm actually not doing the thumb thing. There's not really any reason to. I'm using my thumb, index, and middle fingers. That way I can get my middle finger's already going to be in the right place for what's coming next, and my index finger just has to go up to F sharp. And then we've got these chords again. And I'm stopping right there this time on purpose because the next section kind of launches right out of that. But just know that you're already almost right where you need to be for the next section because you will need to be here after that. So that's the right hand. Let me go through the left hand and then I'll show both together. The left hand is really the hard part of this though, so we'll spend some time on that. Okay, so the left hand of the second half of the second chorus is probably the hardest part of the song. There's a lot of jumps. It's worth noting that this section is a significant bit slower than the first half of the second chorus was, which I said was the fastest part. And it's fortunate and probably logical that this part is slower. One thing I'm actually going to do is I'm going to cheat and use my right hand so that you can see what the chords are in effect that you will be doing with your left hand. So we got this, then this, that's in effect what you're doing together. Now, what you're actually going to be doing is effectively that. You're going to do an octave stab, a jump, a chord. I like to do this with my ring and middle finger rather than my pinky and ring finger. You could really do it either way. This is absolutely the hardest thing because, well, I guess you could think about doing it that way. Maybe that would actually be easier, and I should have thought of that, like, several months ago, but and then at the end of this, you're going to be getting back to here for the next part, so just so you're aware, you will be jumping a little bit down again. This is going to take a ton of practice. There's not really anything else to sugarcoat it with other than you're going to need to just get used to the jumps. And some of them should become second nature, especially when you've got multiple jumps in a row in short succession, because like some of them are just a full-blown phrase. Like those, but then when you've got stuff like that where it's 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, just really quick like that. That's definitely going to take some practice. And then the ones at the end are absolutely the most difficult because it's the 1, 2, 3, and it's changing all the time. 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. So, yeah, it's a handful. It's multiple handfuls, arguably. I'm going to play that. I'm going to just go ahead and play both hands together so you can see what it ends up looking like. But yeah, this is definitely the most challenging, or at least one of the most challenging parts of the song, of the Piano Collections version. So let's do that and then move on to... We're getting close to the end once we're done with this. So the light is appearing at the end of the tunnel, so that's the good news. Alright, great. We've made it through the hard part. The next part is significantly easier. The right hand's really easy to learn because you already know it. It's that. It's just that repeating. The left hand is again going to involve octave stabs, jumping to chords, but it's a lot easier than the previous section because you don't have to worry about doing it nearly as fast. So those are your chords. So putting them together. And that's it. Worth mentioning that there's going to be a jump to the next section. So we're here, we need to get up here, and then this, interestingly enough, has to get to exactly the same thing an octave higher. Which is real interesting because it's kind of like switching, that same chord is switching jobs because it's going to be as the first chord of the sequence instead of the second. But let's jump into that last part right now. So, the last part of the outro, as I mentioned, starts with this in the left hand. The right hand is again doing the exact same thing. This is actually exactly the same as the very beginning of the song. Then our left hand switches to this chord. There's your lead into the end of the song. And then the end, first we've got 3 notes in each hand, and you want to try to space them as evenly as possible. And you'll probably need to pivot a little bit with your right hand, because you need to do that. And there's your end. So, I'll play that one more time, but that's it. We've completed the song. And that just about does it. That's the entire song. Congratulations, you've gotten to the end of the tutorial. Hope it was helpful. Let me know if you have any questions. You can leave a comment. And yeah, I'll see you next time for more video game covers and probably more Nier tutorials. So, see you next time.